Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
ARROW is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I am here today with two very good friends of mine from the UK, and we're going to have a really amazing conversation, and I'm not going to waste any more time, so I'm going to introduce them. First up, we have Davey, and then second up, we have Ash, and they are the hosts of the Mechanism podcast. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. Really looking forward to it.
No, we've met up a few times in person, and the conversations have always just been so amazing, so incredible. You've got a wealth of knowledge between both of you, and I just, I'm a big fan of the show, your podcast. I was saying to Davey before we're recording that I was listening to the first two episodes in Amsterdam, and I was just enthralled by it. So I can't wait to see what else you guys come up with.
Great to have your feedback and to know that you're a fan of the podcast, Vinnie, because you are we follow you and your channel Disclosure Team, and so we're inspired to follow where you lead, Vinnie.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Well, listen, I'm going to jump straight in with the first question, and I'm going to go with something that's current that really just sort of happened in the last couple of days, and that's the July the 26th hearing for the House Oversight Committee. And we just found out that the three witnesses are going to be Commander David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and whistleblower David Grush. So I'd just like to know your thoughts on anything to do with that, really. Any expectations or anything at all?
My first thought is I'm really annoyed at when they've chosen to do it, because I'm on a training course, so I can't even listen into it on the background. So it's very inconsiderate of them. Seriously, I think it's incredible to have this kind of discussion that they're having in open, and to have those three caliber of witnesses, experiencers, people who are whistleblowers, providing that level of information that they're going to do is really exciting. I find it really interesting that they've gone for those three particular as well. We have Grush as the whistleblower, we have Fravor, of course, from the Tic Tac, and then we have Ryan Graves, who, whilst he wasn't the guy who that was Fravor, was from the gimbal video. So they've picked some really key, well-known, well-established items to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Ash? Any thoughts?
No, I agree. I echo everything Davey said. I think one thing I'd like to pick up on is there's been a little bit of negativity I've seen around these witnesses. People saying, "Oh well, we've heard it all before." Well, we might have, because we're interested in the subject, you know, the UFO community, as it were, would have heard that. Obviously, they would have, but we need to think this is bigger than that. The scope of it is huge. You know, this is pushing this out to the masses potentially. So there's going to be a lot of people new to the subject that aren't aware of the accounts that these sources can, you know, provide and share with everyone. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome of that and how this is received by the people that aren't in the know and don't know about this. I think that's a really exciting part of these hearings.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, I saw some people say that, oh, we were expecting 5 more whistleblowers to be at these hearings. And, you know, I understand that would be nice, but I think we're still in that process phase of things where it's not all just going to come out, you know, at the click of a finger. So, you know, I think it'll be certainly very interesting.
I think as well that because certainly Fravor and Graves, their stories are well known, have been well repeated, it'll allow the questionings, the line of questioning to be quite good because it's not coming to everybody cold. Nobody can say, what? No, never heard of that case, never heard of that instance. There's enough publicly available material out there that they are a well-known and established voice on the topic, which is good, along with the, like we said before, the quality and the caliber of their reputations that really add weight to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ryan Graves actually himself said today that he's not only there to talk about what he was involved in, but he's there on behalf of, you know, tens of other pilots who have spoken to him, who are part of his squadron or whatever, who have encountered these things on a daily basis. And I think that's really important as well. I think, you know, it's good to get this information into the hands of the people that can actually do something with it. So I'm positive about it. Again, I will keep my expectations fairly low just so that I'm not disappointed. And, you know, you never know. We might get something kind of eye-opening. Who knows? Who knows?
I think there's always something new that comes out of this, and there's always something to take from this. Every other hearing before, every other involvement where we've seen kind of officialdom getting involved, there's always been something that we can take out of it and kind of pushes that ball further down the field. So hopefully, again, we will see something from this. What that will be, we don't know, but I guess that's part of the excitement for people that are interested in it like us.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So we'll see. But listen, guys, what I want to do now is I want to jump right back into you guys' kind of history. And I want to just know from each of you, what got you interested in the UFO subject?
I'll go first on this one because I'm older. Only just. I think I'm probably the oldest here. But yeah, for me, it was a school library book. I was at the age of 6 or 7 and I went into the school library. And there, in and amongst all of the other books on history and castles and everything else, was a book, the Usborne Book of UFOs. And it treated UFOs as in exactly the same way they treated the Battle of Hastings. Wow. It was a book that laid out the facts, that there were these sightings, that were these evidence left. It talked about close encounters 1, 2, and 3. And it was just a factual book. And so I read this book and went, okay, yeah, these things are no more or less likely to be seen by me than a tiger or a lion. And yeah, I'm not going to see a lion or a tiger every day, but they're still real. And it was just a really eye-opening book. There was 3 of them in the series, one on UFOs, one on ghosts, and one on monsters. I also got the one on monsters. And when I was 10 years old, I was so into the Loch Ness Monster that my family holiday consisted of a trip up to Loch Ness.
Wow.
So yeah, it started very early for me.
That's amazing. What about you, Ash?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint. I kind of always seem to have an interest, and it's waned over the years, and some years I'm more interested than other years, and something will pop up and then I'm interested again. Obviously, the last few years, ever since kind of the 2017 revelations, etc., I've been really engrossed in it. But yeah, I've always had an interest in it. I think it goes back to childhood. My dad's kind of an avid reader and had a massive collection of books. He also had a lot of books that were kind of passed down from my granddad as well, because he was a subscriber to Reader's Digest, so he used to get all these books. And
right.
Yeah, my dad had loads of books. He had one on folklore, which I'm proud to say he's now passed down to me, and I've got it in my collection. British folklore, and there was also a book, I think it was called The Unexplained, and we touched upon this on our podcast, didn't we, Davey? I described it as a haunting image of a kind of spherical UFO with these lights coming out of it. I think it was over, the picture was obviously superimposed over what I think it was Stonehenge. I have to try and find the image. And it was a really old book. I think it was St. Michael, when Marks and Spencer's own brand kind of thing. But this book literally was, as Dave said, so engrossing. It had so many accounts in it, and I was just hooked. I was just flicking through the pages, and I was like, wow, can this stuff be real? And it kind of just gets your mind going. And I don't know, I was just hooked. And then it's just progressed on from there, really. And then, yeah, a few strange experiences throughout my life, and it leads you asking more questions. And then, yeah, before you know it, you've read a million books and you're starting up your own podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, have either of you had a sighting at all, or anything, any kind of experience?
No, we both have. I think David's probably got an interesting sighting-wise to share with you, I imagine.
Yeah, I went through a phase in my late teens, early 20s, and I'm fortunate enough to live in a UFO hotspot. So there is a moorland about 3 or 4 miles away from where I live, which was seen to a lot of UFO sightings over the years, including by a well-known former UFO researcher and a former a former UK policeman, Tony Dodd. And we decided as teenage boys, wouldn't it be fun to go up and sit on the moors and see if we could see anything? And the first night we went up there were 2 of us sat in a car on the moorland, watching the sky above us, watching for lights coming over. And we'd been there maybe an hour, and a police car turned up, and 2 coppers got out and said, "Now then, boys, what are you doing?" And we said, "Oh, we're up here looking for UFOs." And they went, "Oh, right, you won't see them up there. We see them over there all the time. They just come over the brow of that hill. That's where you want to be watching, boys." And so we did, and we went up there every night for probably 6 or 7 months. And on one occasion, we had a really strange sighting. 2 orange balls of light, as we used to call them, balls in the UFO world. Now everybody calls them orbs. Popped up maybe about 150 yards away from us, behind a wall or just above a wall, drifted across in tandem, and then just blinked out and were gone. And on that particular occasion, we had 12 other people with us as well. We had a group of friends who were like, well, the 2 weird boys who keep going up onto the moors looking for UFOs. We don't believe it. It's not true. It's all bunkum. It's, it's swamp gas and, tinfoil hat stuff. And they just went, jaws hit the floor, and it felt like to me that they'd come and put a show on for the skeptics and the non-believers. So that was my real introduction to this, into the rabbit hole that we got into.
That's amazing. Yeah. Did you actually go up to the location at a later date and see, could it have been, the people with torches and all those kind of possible prosaic explanations?
I have visited that same site probably 1,000 times since.
Wow.
And still can't work out what else it could have been.
Yeah.
Or what it was. It was unusual. It was strange. And the other thing about these balls of light, 2 orange balls of light, there was no lensing effect, so they didn't shine light down onto the ground. There was no shadow cast by them. Absolutely no sound. And I know Jenny Randalls talks about the Oz effect, where everything goes deadly quiet.
Yeah.
We had that for the time they were there as well. And even just the way they blinked out was like they were literally there, and then the next instant they were gone. It was, yeah. But yeah, we've run. In fact, one of my best friends said to me about 6 weeks ago, "Do you remember those 2 lights we saw on the moor?" I said, "Yeah." "What do you think they were?" I said, "I have less idea now than I did then."
Yeah, that always seems to be the thing with sightings and stuff. It just, the more you look into it or this subject, the more you just seem further away from the answers. So no, that's really fascinating. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, one thing I want to really kind of delve into is the mechanism, this name that you've used. So I'm going to go to you first, Ash. What can you tell me about the mechanism behind the phenomenon? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think for me personally, it's about all of these previously siloed subjects or related subjects that, they've often been looked at in silo. And I think for me, if we're ever going to try and get to the bottom, or at least, we probably won't get to the bottom, but at least try to understand what's actually going on, we need to start joining the dots, linking things up, finding the patterns. And for me, and when myself and Dave were discussing this, it's around how do we do that? And is there some underlying mechanism? Is there some underlying kind of code almost that brings all this together? And if there is, how do we start exploring that? We can't be looking at everything in silos. We can't just look at UFOs. We can't just look at Bigfoot. We can't just look at consciousness studies. It has to all be done collectively, and we have to start looking at the patterns and then do it objectively as well. So really, the mechanism is around how we tie that together and exploring, is there a mechanism? There may or may not be, but it would seem, for me, the more I look into this topic and related topics and the phenomenon, however we want to phrase that, there does seem to be a lot of crossover between all these different subjects. And really the whole idea around the podcast was how we can bring that together, shed some light on that, and just have fun, really, chatting about this stuff, because it's really interesting. Why wouldn't you be interested in it? And if we can spur some listeners on to want to do a bit more reading and a bit more research themselves, then that's only a great thing. And we love hearing about all of these stories and all of these other accounts that have been going on. And yeah, it's just great fun. And if we can try and get to the bottom of it, then let's do that.
Yeah, amazing. Great answer. And yeah, Davey, what about you, my friend?
I'm super glad you asked Ash that first, because we spent probably longer trying to decide on the title of the podcast than we did deciding whether to do one. And Ash came up with the name, The Mechanism, and it is just that. So we come from very different backgrounds. Ash is super analytical, super process orientated, and, you know, eye for fine detail. I don't. I sit at 5,000 feet and float around in the sky looking down on stuff. I'm in my day-to-day work. I'm a strategist. I have to take that 1,000 feet view. But again, I do that same thing. I take that high view and I see the patterns, I see the lines, I see the way that things connect together. And that's what we're trying to do in our podcast. We realize that there are just so many disparate, seemingly unconnected areas of interest here, but there's something that there's like a thread or something that seems to run through them, and we just want to pull at those threads and see what's on the other end. And it seemed like a nice concept, this idea that there's something that ties it all together, a clockwork mechanism or a series of codes or something like that. So we invite our listeners to share their thoughts on this as well and tell us what they think, what patterns they see there in the phenomenon as well.
Yeah, again, great answer. Like the way that you two bounce off each other in the show, and it really does kind of pull everything together. Because, you know, I've always considered myself a nuts and bolts researcher, and I've always kind of struggled with how do I expand my research into, I'm going to use the phrase woo, you know, it's something that's quite unusual and new to me, but I'm very aware, like you said, that there are connections there. And so how would you what advice would you give to someone who was trying to expand? You know, what advice would you give to me? Where would I start and how would I pull it all together?
I have a saying that crops up quite frequently, and it could have been an alternate title to the podcast, which is we need to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that the wind blows through.
Yeah.
And it's a quote from Groucho Marx, that well-known comedian, more comedian than philosopher, but I still maintain he's a philosopher. But it's just about accepting. And again, I have this desire to probe the more unusual aspects of these phenomena. And I, Vinnie, come from traditionally, I was a nuts and bolts. These are solid craft being flown by greys coming in from Zeta Reticuli. And I heard an interview. I was at a conference in the early 90s, and there was a Swedish investigator, Dr. Rauni Kilder. And one of the things she said that really resonated with me and set me off down this path was, we have to accept that these things may come from different realms. And I spent 15 minutes wondering what on earth she was talking about. And I realized she meant a realm.
Yeah.
And a realm is just a place that is of real, another reality, and it really just made me think, okay, yeah, let's just keep our minds open to what the possibilities may be. Western science and academia has a habit of being very narrow focused and specialist, to the detriment that we miss a lot of key information. And the example I fall back on frequently is the hole in the ozone layer. So I work now as a sustainability consultant, so it's an area close to my heart. But for 15 years, they had been monitoring the ozone layer. But they had set the parameters for what they were expecting to see so narrow that any data that fell outside of those parameters was discounted. So for 15 years, they were ignoring the fact that there was a hole in the ozone layer because they weren't expecting to see a hole in the ozone layer. They weren't looking for it. Any data that fell outside that accepted norm was discounted. And to me, it's a perfect example of why we need to just broaden that view a little bit. Those tunnel vision, means we exclude what really could be happening.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. That's really good. Now, Ash, Davey's talking there about keeping an open mind. And one thing that we are kind of lacking in this subject is hard evidence and facts. So it's great to keep an open mind, but how do you kind of hold yourself back from just going too far in with your belief systems, let's say?
Yeah, it's a really good point you raised there. It is difficult, and it can be difficult, as Davey alluded to. The more you read, the more crazy it gets, and the more woo it gets, as you said, Vinnie. And it is hard, and you kind of have to have an internal filter, and you have to check yourself every now and then, and make sure you're not getting too engrossed, or you're not going too far down one path. And unfortunately, you do see people that it does affect them. It does affect their mental health, and it does affect their views and outlook on things as well, and it can lead to almost like an extremism, really, in their belief system. So it is difficult, it is tricky, but I would say if people are feeling like that, they need to step away and just have a break from it, really, and do something that gets them back into the mindset where they feel calm and okay and normal. Well, what is normal is one thing there, but normal for them, everyone has their own level. But it is difficult, and I've been down that path where I've read so much stuff, and your mind's just exploded. So you have to take a step back from it. But personally, you know what everyone has their own system for being objective and trying to work out fact and fiction. We inherit as children. It's kind of one of the first systems we develop is kind of learning what is reality. We spoke about it on one of our recent podcasts, didn't we? But what is reality? What is that around us? You learn that from a child. It's kind of instilled in you from a child, and you need to bring that into adulthood as well, and have your own internal filter, and just always have that open mind, but don't just believe everything with the first thing. And hard evidence is hard to come by. The very nature of the subject makes it very hard to come by, and I think that is one of the reasons, as you were saying, David, that Western science hasn't been that interested in this, but we are starting to see a slight change, I think, and people are a bit more open to it. With some of the wording we're seeing now in academia and some of the projects that we're seeing coming out, you wouldn't have seen that 10-15 years ago. You look at some of the work that's coming out of CERN, you've now got scientists saying they think there's 11 dimensions, I think it was at last count. This is crazy stuff, and top people are coming out with that. Some really academic and clever people, much more clever than I am, are saying this. So it's great stuff, and just keep checking yourself, and don't watch too much news. That's what I say. News is very negative. Be careful how much news you watch.
There's one thing I'd add to that as well, which is make use of the people around you. So keep grounded people around you and listen to the critical voices, the skeptical voices. I attended a day-long training session at Oxford University 2 months ago that was hosted by two former editors of The Skeptic magazine. Now, they might as well have a big title across their chest or forehead that says Skeptic. And I went there with the intention of learning their thought mechanisms and their processes that they use to challenge a host of phenomena. They were talking about vampires, UFOs, ghosts. So again, I was utilizing that day to hone my critical thinking skills. So that's the other thing I would say is, whilst you have that open mind, maintain that critical challenge as well, and surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you, because it can pull you down that rabbit hole and it can be a dark and lonely place. So you need that grounding and that connectivity of people who will give you a dissenting voice and a challenging view.
Yeah,
I think you're right, David. It's like checks and balances. So, sorry, Ben, I was just going to say, it's like checks and balances. So you imagine like the scale of justice is like one side you've got like all of the kind of like woo stuff, on the other side you've got more objectives. So you kind of need to balance that out and just make sure that you've got a good blend of both, really, and then you can make that informed decision yourself, because that's what we should be doing. Everyone should make their own decisions and not feel like they've got to just pursue one line of inquiry because someone else of a higher authority said so. Like, make decisions for yourself, read into this yourself. Don't take what anyone says as gospel. Have a look at it yourself, and maintain that critical thinking and open mind.
Yeah, great points. Really good points made there from both of you. And that it was actually leading into my next question was about kind of critics and skeptics. But let's bring it into like people closer to you, maybe family members or colleagues, and like how do you deal with their skepticism, or oh, UFO is just pseudoscience or it's just nonsense? How do you deal with that?
I have a really nice story to tell on this one. In fact, if I was to flip my camera here, we would see on the back of my work laptop, I have a Disclosure Team sticker, and I have one of Dan's stickers with the Tic Tac on the back. In fact, here we go. Let me lift it up. There we go. Oh, it's not going to show. There we are. Just about to see it. So I go into executive business meetings with this laptop, and I flip it open, and I let people see that. And I've had discussions with corporate level executives who've said, "What's that on your laptop?" And I say, "It's UFOs, it's UAPs." And they go, "Interesting." And I can say, the US government is investigating it. There is a task force. There have been 2 task forces. There have been 3. They are real. Don't know what they are, but the US government is spending money investigating it. And it has become legitimized. And that 2017 article that started this ball rolling for so many people has given it credence, has given it legitimacy. And that's the one of the other things that I do is I'm a member of the UAP Medical Coalition as well, which I'm immensely proud to have asked to have been a member of. So in a parallel to that, I live with depression and anxiety, and I'm totally open about that. I'll talk to anybody about it and say, look, I can be high functioning in a senior business role, living day to day with depression and anxiety. And I was actually challenged by somebody on UAP Med to say, why aren't you as open about UFOs and UAPs? And I am now.
Right.
And I can take this discussion into the boardroom of senior executives nowadays, because I actually had somebody who said, the Nimitz, was that the one where they were falling from the sky and the radar guy was... I was like, yes.
Wow.
So this is becoming part of mainstream, whatever mainstream is, discussion in the world today. And things like the hearings next week are only going to accelerate that process.
Wow, that's amazing. What about you, Ash? Because I know you've been in some high profile roles in your work career. So has that come up, the UFO thing?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I've never shied away from the fact that I'm interested in this topic, but likewise, I don't push it. I don't something that I talk about it all the time. Although my wife would say I do. That's different at home. But yeah, I think Davey raised a good point. There is that level of credibility now. You've only got to look at the witnesses that testify next week, the caliber of witnesses there as well. It's really hard for people to ignore this when you've got people with that level of experience and responsibility coming out and saying this stuff's real. You've also got the US government coming out and saying there's official documents out. You've only got to scratch between the surface, and this is what I say to people. Don't, like I said just a minute ago, don't just take my word for it. Go out and do a bit of research. Within 5 minutes of doing a Google search, you can find some pretty compelling written documentation out there from authoritative sources saying this stuff is real. And we don't know what it is, but this is what we're doing to look into it. So if anyone kind of ribs me or gives me any, joking about it, or whatever, I kind of just send them down that path. So look, don't take my word for it. This is what you need to do. Go and have a look here. Here's a podcast to listen to. Go and read this book. And again, just leave it up to them to make a decision for themselves. But yeah, 2017 article certainly made that a lot easier. It certainly gave it that level of, well, it raised the profile, didn't it? And it took it out of the realm of the tinfoil hat brigade and has now put it on a more scientific standing and a basis that everyone can kind of look at and go, actually, there probably is something there. Let's look at it and find out what it is.
And we can direct them to Disclosure Team YouTube channel. So, seriously, look at the caliber of people that Vinnie's interviewing. He's got a 747 pilot on here talking about taking photographs of them as he's flying transatlantic. We have access to that media now as well. We've moved away from a world where mainstream media controls the narrative. Because of things like podcasts, YouTube channels, people have access to see those voices.
Yeah,
so, keep doing your work, Vinnie, because it supports the cause.
Thank you, man. You are very kind, and you're both absolutely right. I think it has been something that since 2017 I've been able to use exactly what you said. That just look, you don't need to go that far just to find credible, whether it be the government or organizations, with high profile scientists or academia. So yeah, absolutely, so true. I'm going to move on. My next question is quite a big one. but we're going to get there. We're going to get through it. So I'd like to know from each of you, what is disclosure, or what does disclosure mean to you? Boom.
This is a tough one. I don't know. I don't know if you can even define it, right? Because everyone has their own version of it. Like you say, it's a personal thing. But it's not like this is new stuff. Like, people have been talking about UFOs, and people have been, credible people have been coming out and saying this for so long. It's almost like disclosure, if there is such a thing, it's already happened. It's been there. It's been hidden in plain sight. Well, not meaning to use Ross Coulthard's title of his book, but it's true. It has been hidden in plain sight for a long time. And people have just either chose to ignore it, or, like I said, it's been put in the run with a tinfoil hat brigade, and it's been belittled and laughed at. Whereas it's only now that we're starting to say, oh, well, it's something new. Well, it's not. It's always been there. So I think if you look at the literature, if you look at the accounts, disclosure's already happened, in a sense. I mean, I don't know what people are looking for. People use the whole analogy of the UFO land, on the White House lawn, the president coming up. I don't think we'll ever see that, but I think it's already happened. I think there's enough conscious awareness amongst the general populace globally that are interested in this, and we are starting to see a change. So, really hard to define. Yeah, tough question.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to do it.
Well, I'm sure Davey can be more eloquent than I can. He's a bit of a wordsmith, so he'll come up with something a little more eloquent than me.
I would almost repeat word for word what you said, Ash. I think disclosure has happened in terms of we have had official confirmation that it is real. What we haven't had is what it is, what they are, and we may never know. For me, disclosure is the point at which it is inculcated into our culture to the point where it isn't questioned anymore. So I still think we're away from that. And I read recently that 65% of Americans believe in UFOs and extraterrestrials. So we're already over that 50% tipping point. But I think a point will come, and the rate of change at the moment is, I think, within one generation. I think my children, who are 10 and 8 now, will grow up in a world where there isn't the mention of the tinfoil hat. There isn't the Looney Tunes brigade. Yes, people see strange things in the sky. Yes, people hear strange voices. Yes, there's a black cat walking across a field there that shouldn't be here, but is. And I think that for me is disclosure. It's when, and I think we're just one generation away from it. It's when it becomes an accepted part of the world, of the perception and the reality around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, both making some good points, and actually made me think there by what you said is, there has been so much anecdotal evidence from witnesses over the many, many decades that, you can't ignore it. But this is the thing that some, I'm going to say debunkers, will say, well, it is just stories. It's not enough. We may need official confirmation from the president standing up saying, yes, there is something here that we don't know. I mean, this is the thing, and this is why it's a hard question, because you can go that the amount of anecdotal evidence is everything. It means disclosure, and then everyone else saying it means nothing. So it's really difficult to navigate. So I appreciate both. I tend to agree more with both of what you guys said than, just having.
I was gonna have to play the podcast host and throw it back to you, Vinnie, and ask what you thought.
I still like the small d disclosure, capital D disclosure argument, let's say, where, yes, I believe small d disclosure has happened, and we've been working through it for many years now due to all of the anecdotal evidence, because we don't have that hard on paper. Look, there is something here. We're that close to it, I believe. And then capital D disclosure, that's when I would see us in a post-disclosure world, this world that you mentioned, Davey, where our children will be living through this. And I guess there is, maybe we'll need some official acknowledgement. I'm not necessarily, I don't go by that it would have to be a world leader. I think it would have to be something else. And at this point, I don't know what. So I still think we're in between the small d and the capital D. I guess that's where my head is at right now. So, yeah, thanks for throwing that back at me.
Sorry. You come up with the hard questions. I couldn't let that one pass.
It's fair enough, man. It's absolutely fair enough, man. Well, look, we're talking about, and I keep mentioning that word, anecdotal evidence, but do you think there are any cases spanning the years and the decades that really have or is really feels compelling to you that it really does point towards a non-human intelligence?
I'm going to let Ash answer that one first. He's the more analytical and, let's say, science and data-based of the two of us.
You've got me here. My brain doesn't work that fast. I don't know. I mean, there's been loads of accounts, hasn't there? I mean, our good friend Graham Riddell has written about the Foo Fighters, and Graham Rendell, sorry, I don't know what I was going about there, has written about the Foo Fighters and all of the history. So you've got a lot of historical accounts there, really credible people, fighter pilots, World War II, fight for the country, seeing the Foo Fighters. So you've got all of the accounts from sort of World War II. But if you go back even further than that, you've got historical accounts and sort of ancient texts and things like that. And I almost feel like society, culture was more open then and happy to discuss it than we are now. It's almost like we've had this like ancestral amnesia where kind of like over history we've lost contact with being able to talk about this sort of stuff and seeing things in the sky and it just being normal, and it's become this weird thing that we can't talk about, this taboo subject. So I think, again, in more modern accounts there's definitely credible accounts, but also if we look back as well, I think there's that fingerprint of this stuff was going on for a long time and it was just being normal, and now it's kind of been put to the side and treated as something to belittle. Can't think of anything off the top of my head straight away. You've got me there. My brain's not functioning very well. I need more coffee.
No, it's fine. You raised some really good points. Absolutely.
I
Davey?
think for me it has to be the Nimitz case.
Yeah.
I just think the weight of testimony there, the video footage that was taken, after Fravor and Dietrich's flight, I just think there's something so there's just the overwhelming weight of evidence there. And I think come next week, we'll know even more about that one as well. And the fact that it's been investigated independently several times as well. So there was the post-ATIP investigation into it. There's also been the work that the SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAPs, has done into it. It just, that's the one that, again, if a total newcomer were to come up to this subject and say, where do I start? I'd say dig into that and just have a read. Watch everything you can on the Tic Tac, the Nimitz incident in 2004.
Yeah, completely. That's always the one case I kind of revert back to as well. But then if I need to, I go back to like sort of the 50s and the pilot sightings. The Lake and Heath case here in the UK is one that always stands out to me for just being something super anomalous. And because of the era and the time and the way that the jet propulsion was at that time, it's beyond belief as to what these objects were doing. So I pull a little bit from both of you guys' answers there. But Ash, you mentioned in there about going back even further to ancient times. And this, again, is another area where I struggle with because, I have always taken in all of the media documentaries and things. And obviously Ancient Aliens is, probably the longest running show. But it's such a difficult area to research because there isn't really anything to study, documents and that. Yes, there's ancient scripts and things. So how do you guys think about and look into that kind of side of things? So we talk about the megaliths and people say, well, the aliens built the pyramids. And, I tend to think that let's give humanity a little bit of a backing here. I think we're a lot more, well-cultured and stuff than people give us credit for sometimes. But again, it is a difficult area. So what do you guys think about sort of ancient theories?
I agree with what you're saying, Vinnie. I think it's very naive of us to think that we are the most modern, technologically advanced iteration of humanity that this planet's ever seen. When you look at the age of the planet and, you look at those ancient structures that have been here before, even modern science now cannot understand how a lot of these places have been built, the precision involved in the engineering, the architecture, we can't even replicate now. There's some caves in India that I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but they're so smooth. The rock has almost been kind of like, it's not mechanical. It's almost like it's been lasered some way. It's smooth, and it creates these resonancy chambers, and we don't really understand what they were used for. You've got all of the sites in Egypt, the Serapeum, you've got all these like precision engineered places. You've got the pyramids in Egypt. I can't remember the exact statistic, but it worked out that for it to have been built in the time period archaeologists think it would have been built, it would have had to have a block laid like every 15 seconds or something ridiculous like that, which is clearly that's not possible. So what technology are they using to put it there? And I think we have to give hats off to people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson that have been doing a lot of work in this, and also Ben from Uncharted X, who's on YouTube, and a lot of stuff, and really raised the profile of this. And I think there is definitely something there. Those guys have been put through the mill from so-called academics that are poo-pooing it all and saying it's not scientific. But no one else is taking that leap and having a look into this sort of stuff. So it takes some brave people to, hang their flag and say this is what I believe in and this is why. And I think we're starting to see more of that becoming to the forefront and people looking into this topic and trying to get to the bottom of what were the ancients up to, what did they know, and what can we learn from them? Because there's definitely something there. I think, unfortunately, programs like Ancient Aliens haven't helped things, because as far as that program's an entertainment show, and as far as that's concerned, everything's aliens, they did everything, and that kind of probably puts a lot of people off looking into this. But actually, if you go to some credible people and you do read into this, there's definitely something there. I definitely recommend looking at Uncharted X, though. He's got some great videos on YouTube, and he goes into detail saying why this stuff isn't possible under our current understanding, and there must have been another technology involved. I agree with you, Vinnie. I think humanity has been way more advanced in the past, and it's very naive of us to think we're the best version of humanity that's ever been it. And it may well be that those previous versions of humanity are related to the UFO phenomenon, and that's what we're seeing, some sort of like leftover civilization that's still here, hiding from us because we're like kids with weapons, with nuclear weapons. It's like giving a child a gun, and there's probably less of them than there are us, and we're a threat to them potentially. That's just one theory. There's no evidence to back it up. It's all circumstantial, and it's just one theory. But that could be what we're seeing, which again, talking about mechanism and trying to link all this stuff together, is why it's an interesting thing to explore, and why we should be looking down both angles and not just coming to some confirmed conclusion just because academia says so. I mean, archaeology, in essence, is just the best guess of what happened historically. Not to knock any archaeologists, I think it's a great subject, great field, and I'm interested in it too, but it is just the best guess, and we need to think outside the box, and we need to think in what else is there to find out. And that's part of being human as well, always trying to learn, always trying to find out new discoveries and new thinking. I waffled on a lot there, but yeah, as you can tell, I'm quite interested in this.
Wonderful points, really, really good points, and definitely some good recommendations as well. So, no, I appreciate it. Davey, what about you?
As you said, Vinny, it's really easy and almost sort of lazy thinking to think that our predecessors couldn't have built some of the things that they have done and they did. And I think what we will probably see in time is a better understanding of actually how long we have been here. There's a well-known saying that sort of bounces around: the more we look, the older we get. And it's to sort of, without saying Göbekli Tepe, sounding like Jimmy Church, we are realising that our civilization has been here longer and has been more established. The more we look, the older we get. So we have to be really careful not to immediately take this modern colonial view that, well, how could anybody else have done this? We are the superior species and the best iteration of mankind. What I do find really interesting, particularly in these discussions about the megaliths and ancient structures and this ancient alien theory, is that there are some patterns and threads that keep appearing. And what it suggests to me is that perhaps we've lost some of our understanding of the natural world around us. And so perhaps as we become a little bit more scientifically and narrow focused, we lose sight of some of the areas of what is natural and what is considered natural around us. And again, science has come out of the study of nature, but it gets a little bit narrow. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that aliens have been coming down here forever. Maybe that we share this space with them, or whatever it is, or parts of the phenomenon anyway. And I know Lou Elizondo and Gary Nolan and others have talked about a shadow biome. And again, you have to realise that within the last 100, 150 years, we didn't realise that the most plentiful by weight and by number organism on the planet, microscopic organisms, existed. 150 years ago, we didn't acknowledge them. We now know that by weight and by number. There are more of them on the planet than anything else. Who's to say there isn't something at the other end of the scale that we haven't yet discovered that shares this planet and this space with us?
Yeah, excellent. Really good points as well. Again, really good. Let's move on to another question. This one is more about kind of the media's portrayal of the UFO subject. And just, it's often been sensationalized and things like that. Any association with the paranormal and stuff like that. But do you think we're sort of starting to see the tides turn when it comes to the media? Ash, I'm going to put that one at you.
No, I think we definitely are. I think, and I think Ross Coulthard has made mention of this. We're starting to see less of the X-Files theme tune music and kind of more serious reporting and investigation on this. And I do see a tide change. Perhaps not here in the UK just yet. If anything, the UK just ignores it altogether. It's not even, you don't even get those jokey tabloid news stories anymore. Not on TV anyway. I mean, you obviously get them in the tabloids. That's how they make their money. But yeah, I mean, I've been really shocked that we've not even heard anything about David Gorge or any of the hearings, or we've not even heard a snippet of it. I've not seen any sort of mainstream news here in the UK. But yeah, certainly globally and in the States, you're certainly seeing a more serious take on it, which is really good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Davey, thoughts on the media?
Yeah, definitely seeing a change. And I've first started going to UFO conferences at the late 80s and early 90s. And the approach of the media has changed massively since then. Again, a huge debt of gratitude has to be passed down to Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kane and Helene Cooper for that article. It has had a sea change. I also feel that, and Ash mentioned there the X-Files theme tune, I also feel that actually television programs like the X-Files, films like Close Encounters, and even down to silly little, kids programs like Alf, Alien Lifeform are formed a part of that. And I go back to the December 1960 Brookings Institute research paper that was published back in the 60s, which was a theory on how would they communicate extraterrestrial life to the world. It was in the early days of space travel. And if you look at what they wrote there, it's not so far away from what's been going on in terms of I remember when I first read this, it was described as indoctrination, and I think it's probably a little bit too strong. But there's certainly been a process of education and a process of normalization around this topic and these subjects. And the cynical part of me thinks, this is all part of a long, super slow drip disclosure. Another part of me thinks it's purely coincidental, but there has been a massive change in the acceptability and the destigmatization of the subject. And what I feel we see now is that a lot of those, and I used the term skeptics earlier, you used the term debunkers, and I will refer to them here as debunkers. I feel like a lot of them are in their death throes at the moment. They are getting really desperate. They are clutching at straws. They are pulling on the weakest of evidence. And again, it's that wonderful case where when it takes more, you have to suspend your disbelief more to believe their explanation than to just accept that it could be something unusual.
Yeah.
That for me is the sniff test.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen quite a bit of that recently, to be fair. But it's funny, you made me think of something. You mentioned the X-Files music there, and I was on a mainstream radio show recently, and that point came up, and I said, yeah, we're seeing less and less of the X-Files music and that. And then this show was recorded, and when it came out, it started with the X-Files music, and I was like, come on, man, I even gave you that to kind of point you in the other direction, and you still went with it. I was mind boggled. It was just unbelievable. So
here's the question: what music should they have put on as a background and as a bed? I don't know. Maybe we need a new X-Files. Maybe that's the next thing.
That's a good point, actually. I mean, anything but those, same old, overused, stereotypical, stigmatized tracks. But I'm sure, I don't know.
Isn't it interesting
how
how
to expect it to completely disappear?
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't it interesting how a piece of music though has become so associated with that ridicule and the kind of like jokey nature of it? Like it's almost become like subliminally linked to that, and that's how we associate it. I just think that from a psychology point of view, that's really interesting. So you're right, David. Yeah, we need something else that kind of invokes the opposite of that and treats it more seriously. So if you know any
It's
musicians
difficult
out there,
though. It is difficult though, because you hear like say the theme tune from the movie Jaws automatically kind of gives you fear, and then I think Psycho as well, and things like that. So it is ingrained in us to just continue associating certain tracks with a certain feeling or a certain way of looking at a subject. So I kind of get it, but like I think enough's enough. And when you tell them and they don't listen, that's what I find
I have
frustrating.
the answer. The answer is the theme tune. The theme tune to the Mechanism podcast. That's
There
what we
you
need
go.
them to play in the background.
Yeah. Now listen, we're all from the UK, and something that we haven't heard much about in recent years, but was really big in the 90s, was crop circles. And it's definitely a subject that I've looked into in the past, and I then shied away from because I found too much evidence of the hoaxing side of things to then really struggle with being able to sort of research it any further. I just wondered what you guys think about crop circles and whether you've looked into them.
It's a topic I have. I would say exactly the same as you, Vinny. In the early 90s, they were all the rage, and there was a lot of discussion about the actual molecular changes to a crop that was done during a crop circle, and there was discussion that you could tell which was hoaxed and which weren't hoaxed by the way that the crop was folded, and there were these molecular cellular level changes to the crop. And I sort of stepped away from that a little bit as well. It isn't something I've looked into deeply, but if you look at the works of the likes of Karen Alexander, they are still cropping up. They're still coming up every year, just as amazing, just as beautiful, just as inspiring as well. And I can't help but think that this is all part of without being too Jacques Vallée about it, part of a program and an extension and a means of communication, a non-literary means of communication. I would love to go and spend the night in a crop circle area, go down to Wiltshire, and maybe Ash will go and record an episode down there one night, or just to visit a crop circle. But it's not something that I've really looked into.
No, that's cool, Ash.
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge on them isn't as in depth as it is when it comes to UFOs or like cryptids or anything like that. But I think you made a good point, though. It's still happening. It's never stopped. It's always been happening since the 90s. It's just media's lost interest in it for whatever reason. Maybe it wasn't selling papers or something. I don't know. But I think you're right. There's been a lot of hoaxes. There's been a lot of obvious frauds. But some of the complexities and some of the detail involved in some of these things. I mean, hats off to whoever can do that in the middle of the dark in an uneven field and not be seen by anyone. I mean. Again, it goes back to what you were saying just a minute, David, about the debunking. Like, there's more steps for it to be. It's harder for it to be the debunking theory than what it is something less prosaic. So I think perhaps it's a bit of both. There are some that are there are some that are clearly faked and that are hoaxed, and there are some that defy explanation, and they're the ones we should be looking at. We talk about patterns and try and investigate and find hard evidence. They're the ones we should be looking at. But unfortunately, because those hoax ones are out there, people don't look into it. They just poo-poo it, and it all gets tarnished with the same brush as it being hoax. So I'm certainly interested in looking into it more. I think location is really interesting as well, where these tend to pop up more in kind of areas that, again, if you look throughout history, have got lots of folklore attached to them, or witchcraft attached to them, or ancient stones and kind of like sacred places. There's definitely a thread there as well that needs looking at. And one thing I just wanted to raise that's interesting, I've got the book, I haven't yet read it, I've got loads of books I pick up, like charity shop stuff that I still haven't read, but there is a book actually out there around crop circles. I think one of the authors of the co-authors was Ralph Noyes, who was a senior member of the Ministry of Defence, heavily interested in UFO, really senior guy. He was involved in a book involving crop circles. I haven't read it yet, I need to look at it, but the fact that you've got people, again, of that level of ability, that level of experience, had a distinguished career in UK intelligence that's interested in this, so far that he actually went and wrote a book about it or co-authored a book, I think speaks volumes that, again, this is probably where we should be looking.
Yeah.
There's two other things I'd just like to touch on whilst we're talking crop circles. And the first part of it is I learned a brilliant lesson during the whole crop circle thing in how, one, it takes 1,000 positive examples to prove that UFOs, crop circles are real. It takes one negative to prove that they're not real. And that negative for the crop circle thing was Doug and Dave. So Doug and Dave came out and said, we're hoaxing them. And all of a sudden, the whole world, almost to a T, went, oh, they were all hoaxed.
Yeah.
Subject closed, book folded away, off we go, on to the next
I have a
topic.
more modern version of that, Davey. Isn't that what just happened recently with the spy balloons, or the so-called balloons in America? Like, what about the other objects that crash landed? Like, we had the spy balloon, like the Chinese spy balloon, but then everyone else forgot about the others. So it's almost like it's human nature.
Yeah.
It's quite easy. And if I'm not saying this is what happens, but if you're looking at it from kind of like trying to counter that, or if you did want to put something up, it's quite easy to sow disinformation out there, or quickly shut it down by putting something like that in place, because you know it's human nature to pick up on that negativity, and it's a lot easier just to go, oh, we'll forget about that because it's clearly hoaxed, or it's clearly a Chinese spy balloon. So I think that's a bit of a tool of the trade that we see time and time again repeated when things do want to be hushed up.
It's very true. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, guys, time's ticking. We're nearly at the hour mark. We've got 5 more minutes, and I think it'd be great if we could, just before we end, touch upon what's coming up for the mechanism, because I know, like you've said, you touch upon lots of different areas of ufology, but also outside of that with cryptids and other things. So if you could just give us a rundown, a little cheeky sneak peek maybe of what you've got coming in the future.
Absolutely. So our first 4 episodes are really us framing where we're going to go next. So we talked a little bit about who we are, why we're doing the mechanism, and what the mechanism might be. We talked a little bit about what brought us together, which was this huge interest in UFOs. We then tackled the really super broad topic of the supernatural, and I had my 2 young children get involved in drawing a beautiful, great big umbrella into which we tried to throw all of the different supernatural phenomenon. And I would like to thank our listeners who kindly pointed out the wonderful things that we'd missed, such as electronic voice phenomenon and sacred geometry, which I'm really, really upset that I missed. We then tackled the really simple, 5-minute conversation, what is reality? And what we're going to do now is we're going to dig down individually into each different area of these paranormal phenomena that we covered in our umbrella. And our next episode is going to be A, B, C, and D's. So we're going to be talking about alien big cats. And this isn't the idea that there's a planet full of aliens flying down here who are all cat-like, and I know there are people who talk about the feline aliens. This is the idea that there are black panthers or other similar large cats roaming the UK. And the reason we're talking about this is because for many years people have said couldn't possibly be wild panthers. There's not the wildlife to sustain them. How would they live? How would they survive? And in the last few months, we have found DNA from them. So there are panthers walking around in the wild in the UK. And so if we can have panthers walking around in the wild in the UK that for 30, 40, 50 years people have said impossible, could not be, what else is there out there? So that's our ABCs. And we're going to tie onto there the D for dogs.
Interesting. I like
so
it.
We might touch on Dogman. We might talk about the glowing-eyed beasts that patrol the North York moors. So yeah, that's going to be our next episode.
Oh, that's so amazing.
I think anything and everything,
kudos.
nothing's off the table. Anything that's a little bit strange, a little bit high strangeness, a bit weird.
Man, I can't wait. I'm really excited. And I do urge anybody watching this. That's all right, man. No problem. Yeah, I urge anybody who's listening or watching this to go and check out The Mechanism. Where can everyone find both The Mechanism, but also you guys individually if they want to follow what you're up to?
So, breaking news: the Mechanism podcast has just become part of the Calling All Beings podcast network.
Amazing.
So we've joined our friends DJ and Nathan and Deb and the rest of the crew and Frank the UFO Thinker. So our podcast will be distributed by Calling All Beings. You can also find us on The Mechanism Pod, and we are available on The Mechanism on Spotify. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm Davey Johnston on Twitter. And Ash, over to you.
Yeah, so you can find us at The Mechanism Pod on Twitter. We're on all major podcast platforms as well, so iTunes, Spotify, just look for The Mechanism. And you can find me on Twitter at UK_UAP. And if you want to email the podcast, it's themechanismpod@proton.me. We'd love to hear people's accounts and stories, and hopefully just add on to what they would say about what we see for future. We'd love to get some really interesting guests on. that kind of really specialise in these niche areas and kind of get their take on it. And yeah, we just make a platform really and be a voice for interest and intrigue, I think, and just being open and objective with all these related subjects. Because we find it really interesting, and hopefully everyone else does too.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I'm a big fan already of the show. I wish you nothing but the best success in the future, and thank you both so much for joining me today. It's flown by, and it always does when it's a great conversation with friends. So thank you guys so much.